more episode today. Had enough space on an SD card that I was able to move an episode over. And so this is the last episode we'll be filming today because this is the last script I have written. This is Real Railroads episode 26. I have more titles written out, I just don't have any more scripts written out right now. Based out of Panama City, Florida, is Genesee Wyoming's Bay Line Railroad. This 182-mile short line operates the former Atlanta and St. Andrews Bay Railroad in Florida and Alabama, interchanging with 3 other railroads, one of which is also a GWI property. The route had been built by the Alabama Midland Railway and the Atlanta and St. Andrews Bay Railroad. The AM was controlled by the Atlantic Coastline from 1902 until the ACL-SCL merger. That section eventually became under CSX ownership until 1989 when they spun off their section of the Abiel de Grimes Railway Company. The ASAB, however, had remained independent until 1987 when Stone Container Corporation purchased the railroad. SCC sold the ASAB to Rail Management Corporation on January 1st, 1994, which formed the Bay Line Railroad to take over the ASAB route. On June 26, 1996, the Bay Line absorbed the AG, growing to its current size before Rail Management was purchased by Genesee Wyoming on June 1st, 2005. Today, the railroad hauls aggregates, brick, cement, chemicals, coal, food products, feed products, forest products, metallic ores, minerals, and scrap, interchanging with G&W's Chattahoochee Bay Railroad and CSX Transportation in Dothan, Alabama, then running south, crossing into Florida at Rambo, interchanging with Florida Gulf and Atlantic and Cottondale, and then ending in Panama City, Florida, on St. Andrews Bay near the Gulf of Mexico. For our tracing of the line, we will go north to south, starting with a connection to the CSX near downtown Dothan, Alabama, inside the loop made by US 231 and US 431, and then follow south to Panama City. The Bay Line starts with a long 3-track connection with the CSX behind the houses on Carver Drive. The switch linking the BAYL and CSX is not far from Lake Street and Dothan, Alabama. The interchange forms a dome with the BAL curving south and crossing Lake Street, passing a housing development. The interchange yard ends between East Newton Street and East Birdshaw Street. The main then crosses the Chattahoochee Bay Railroad via the Dothan Railroad Diamond Crossing east of North Range Street. There is a connection between the 2 GWI properties in the southeast quadrant that leads to a small yard. The Genesee Wyoming acquired what is now the Chattahoochee Bay to link the Chattahoochee Industrial and Bay Line, and also the Hilton and Albany, which is next week's episode. So trains of all 3 can operate over each other's tracks without swapping power, so interchange between the 2 involving swapping cars there is probably not common, especially since Genesee Wyoming lists the Bay Line as operating the Chattahoochee Bay, but more on that later. Had to find my place. From the Diamond Bay Line continues south along North Range Street and under US 84. It passes the fire department at the Columbia Highway grade crossing before reaching their classification yard in Dothan. This yard is 5 tracks west of the main with a 6th track east of the main and then a long spur that passes next to the yard office. From the yard, the railroad, still running south, passes through trees and residential areas and Helena Chemical, which is not rail served, followed immediately by a crossing under US 431. South of the major part of the city is a long industrial lead to reach Agra AFC, a fertilizer supplier, and 2 other industries that are not labeled in Google Maps. These could be Agra AFC, also part of nearby Smartland North America, or something else entirely. These are the only industries served by the Bay Line in Alabama. Heading south, the railroad parallels Hodgesville Road, heading into Hodgesville, Alabama, a very small hamlet, little more than a crossroads. From here, it's purely rural, fields and forests, except for the little village of Madrid, where the Bay Line has 2 grade crossings. Approximately 2 miles south is the state line. Through the trees and across US 231 is the official Florida Welcome Center. Heading south, the railroad roughly parallels US 231, but it's several hundred feet to the east in the woods, so invisible to travelers on the road. Or highway, rather. The next community is Campbellton, Florida, where the railroad crosses Florida Route 2 and has 2 spurs going to some sort of business capable of handling tank cars and covered hoppers. There is also a short siding that would be a runaround for this industry. South of Campbellton, US 231 curves eastward to cross the Bay Line, and then heads south on its east side, also south of Campbellton, as an abandoned branch line heading off to the west, past the Graceville Correctional Facility and the Graceville Work Camp. Sweet home, Alabama. And on west. Meanwhile, west past the Graceville Meanwhile, the active line heads due south, mainly through woods with no other industries, though at Country Road there is 2 spurs that once served industry that has been demolished. One of the spurs may be used as a team track for some industry away from the railroad. The next community is Cottondale, where the Bay Line crosses the Florida Gulf and Atlantic at a 90-degree diamond just north of Florida Street. The southeast quadrant of the diamond has a connector between the 2 railroads, and a long 3-track yard south of the diamond allows for interchange between the 2 railroads. There's also a siding in the Florida Gulf and Atlantic west of the diamond. South of Cottondale, US 231 is again alongside the railroad as it passes under Interstate 10. And then they pass a spur leading to a gravel pit, which appears active, but no sign of activity appears near the spur, which looks like it might have been for unloading aggregates, not loading them, with an unloading pit about halfway down the spur. Immediately to the south is a very obviously active industry, and Viva Pellets Cottondale. This has 2 loading tracks off of a Y and receives covered hoppers. Looking at the facility, it would appear the business receives logs via truck, much like a pulpwood mill or paper mill, and instead of turning them into wood chips or pulpwood, it turns them into wood pellets, possibly the kind used in the pellet stoves, and then loads these in covered hoppers for shipment. Continuing south, we pass through a swamp of sorts called Steel City Bay, with the next community being Alfred, in Florida, where the Bayal crosses 3 streets and parallels Alabama Street. Stump Creek is crossed via a deck girder bridge of decent length within sight of US 231. Between here and Compass Lake, we pass a gravel pit that, like many, is flooding, and while passing Compass Lake, an old right-of-way veers off. This was the old right-of-way, as it joins back up not far south, an apparent line straightening at some point in the railroad's history. We then pass through areas set for housing developments, like Tongue Grove Estates, Moore Park subdivision, and Plainview home sites. It's heading into Fountain, Florida. Then it's more proposed development, which at the time the maps were made had not taken off. Even Fountain has very few houses in its blocks. Next to the line is Youngstown, another small community with 2 churches, a school, a fire station, a landscape business, a post office, and gas station along US 231. All this while, US 231 has been alongside the Bay Line, although a while back it again crossed to the west side. Finally, at Rachel's Landing, the Bay Line has some industrial trackage again, a newly built spur going to a site that had yet to be built, and a spur that once served Eastern Industries but has been abandoned and covered up inside the fence. Not much, but it's a future business of some sort in that area if it hasn't already been built since the photos were taken. Through this area, the main is heading southwest instead of its typical almost due south, heading into Panama City, the base of operations and home to most of their customers. The main, about a mile after NY. What the heck? That should be Florida 389, or that should be US 389, I believe. Turns into a 7-track yard with 2 spurs, south of which have a ramp at the end like an old school TOFC ramp. These are likely used for locomotive and maintenance waste storage. Along the yard is an industrial lead that once served a small warehouse and still serves Capital Materials, which receives mill gondolas loaded with steel coils. Southwest of this is the Panama City Yard. As the Panama City Yard is ending, there's a Y that leads to the engine house and shops along with a car shop. This location is labeled as Vulcan Materials Company. This is probably nearby, and the pin is just in the wrong place. In this area is a complicated arrangement of spurs and through tracks going to and through the shops, along with through and around at Conrad Yelvington Distributors. Just got dark in here. Just saw the lighting go down. Which unload open hoppers in 2 locations. Southeast of here, the Bay Line once served. What's going on with the lightning? That's weird. The Bay Lines once served SRM concrete and currently serves preferred materials, which receives covered hoppers, likely of sand. Anderson, Columbia is beyond this, also receiving open hoppers of aggregates. This branch line ends at large complex, which is the West Rock paper mill, receiving tank cars of chemicals and wood chips, and shipping paper products. Cratton Chemical is also in this complex and likely receives some of the tank cars seen spotted in the tracks northeast of West Rock. This paper mill is right on St. Andrew Bay, southeast of downtown Panama City, with the West Watson Bayou between them. Southeast Avenue runs to the paper warehouses. Here there is the Panama City Small Diamond Railroad crossing, which only the east-west tracks are really used. The track going north-south crosses some water along Southeast Street and ends where it turned west. South of the paper warehouses is a port where 3 ships are moored. 2 have rather large helipads on them. What these are, I do not know. They look like they're being built. Back up at the main, heading southwest, away from the yard, the railroad comes to what was a split. However, where the tracks curve south, it has been abandoned. The rails are overgrown and then end at West 11th Street, with only an overgrown spur going to Gorman Company, a plumbing supply store. The other track heads west, crossing Florida Avenue, turning northwest, crossing 15th Street, Balboa Avenue, going through a residential area, and entering the Panama City port. This holds Oceaneering, which looks to deal in communication cables for under the ocean, judging by the huge cable reels outside. I mean, they're big. They're about the size of a freight car. About as big in diameter as a freight car is long. They're huge. Here, there is the Linea Peninsular Warehouse, Berg Pipe Panama City, EB Pipe Coating, and the port itself, and possibly more. Part of the trackage here is the West Panama City Diamond Railroad crossing, which is somewhat visible from U.S. Highway 98. Seeing action at the port could be a problem since there is no public property allowing a safe location to watch. The Port Authority is right there, and there is an FBI office in the port area. Bulkhead flats, boxcars, and covered hoppers are among the cars moved in the port. The Bay Line Railroad once operated a bunch of poorly maintained GP road switchers, some known for spewing oil. Today they operate a single SW1200, a slug, a pair of GP40-2s, a GP38-3, a pair of GP38-2s, 3 GP38s, 3 GP39-2s, and a quartet of SD40-2s. These units are of varied lineage, except for SD40-2s 3321, 6400, and 6445, which were built in 1979 and 1980 for Union Pacific and went to Iowa, Chicago, and Eastern before landing on RCPE and being transferred to the Bay Line. The Bay Line, while it doesn't have much to offer in Alabama, the business in Panama City provide a decent amount of traffic. Unfortunately, I could not find a customer list or information on their traffic volume and operating schedule. This, unfortunately, is common for railroads. There is a website that is working on getting all this information available on the various smaller railroads, but that takes time as railroads are not open to discuss their movements. This concludes this week's episode. Next week, I'll be telling you about the Hilton in Albany, another GWI property, this one running between Hilton, Georgia, on the Alabama-Georgia state line, and Albany, Georgia. I will be covering the Chattahoochee Bay Railroad in the future, which will probably be after the Chattahoochee Industrial, which is scheduled for episode 29. However, depending on what I can write on the CIRR, these two might be one video. The Genesee Moving operates the Chattahoochee Bay Railroad as part of the Bay Line, as on their website, they list the interchange in Hilton, Georgia as being between Hilton and Albany, Chattahoochee Industrial, and Bay Line. However, the tracks used by the Bay Line actually belong to the Chattahoochee Bay Railroad. Besides the customers mentioned in the line profile, the Bay Line also does railroad car storage, which is done by many short lines these days. Last week's episode, I had said that I had made a mistake and said that Patriot Rail owned Florida Gulf and Atlantic, but I didn't say that in this script, so that must have been in a previous script. Oops. That must have been one that's already been recorded, possibly already released. Oh well. It's owned by Florida Gulf and Atlantic is owned by Rail USA.